Ishwar, that guy, has been trying for days now to drag me into some conversation about the pronunciation of Quranic Arabic that he knows nothing about, but he studies Arabic, so he knows something about Arabic. And I've been trying to get out of it. I've literally said to him, I have no interest in this whatsoever. I don't want to talk about this. But he just, like what at least externally appears to be a respectful way, he continues to bring it up to me, but which is actually disrespectful because I'm his teacher and I keep telling him I don't want to talk about this. But he keeps going, hey, what about this? And what about this? And sending me little quips of, statements by text, just kind of dragging me back in again and again. And then to make it worse, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. Right? His ego's too big to admit that. He doesn't know anything at all about Quranic Arabic. Zilch. And he's got some kind of an education in MSA, Modern Standard Arabic, which he tried to explain to me was the Arabic of the Quran exactly, and all the marks that you see in the Quran for pronunciation, as well as all the vowel marks you see in the Quran, those have all been there forever. He tried to make some kind of argument like this. At some point, I don't know if I'm even going to post this lecture, but whatever. Sometimes I'll say Mecca, and sometimes I'll say Makkah, because the Islamic scholars that I've listened to and studied, a lot of them say Makkah, because they're from Saudi Arabia. And the proper name for what we all call Mecca is Makkah al-Mukarramah. And in fact, the Saudi government has said you have to write M-E-C-C-A, Mecca, as M-A-K-K-A-H. That's the proper writing of the word Makkah according to the Saudi government. And the proper name is Makkah al-Mukarramah. That's the full name for what we call Mecca. And one of the reasons that they changed the spelling was to differentiate it from people like, this is the Mecca of all shopping malls. And they want to, the holy city in Saudi Arabia, they want to separate from how Mecca had become just a word to indicate the center of the universe. It was used for commercial purposes. But another reason was they wanted to help people better pronounce the name of their holy city. So then he found that his Egyptian Arabic teacher was like, no, it's pronounced Mecca. Then he sent me a link, but in the link it said that it's pronounced Ma. And so there was even in the links he sent me, there was support for both. I really didn't want to have this conversation because it's not like we're having a conversation about Sanskrit or something like that, which is super important to me. This is another tradition that has a sacred language. Hebrew, Arabic, Sanskrit, those languages are sacred for their followers. And when you have a sacred language, you put a lot of time into preserving it and pronouncing it properly and memorizing it. I mean, to get bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, you don't have to know Hebrew. Like, she doesn't know Hebrew. You don't know Hebrew, do you? She doesn't know Hebrew. What you have to do is memorize and pronounce properly, reasonably properly, a portion of the Torah.
And know how to read it.
Yeah, you can read the symbols, the Hebrew symbols, and then you can pronounce it. But you don't know what it means. Because that's a tradition which considers Hebrew to be sacred. And so how do you become a Jew? You learn a portion of the Torah. You don't learn what it means. It seems ridiculous, right? To learn how to pronounce it and how to recite it and to memorize it, but not even know the meaning of what you're saying. But that stuff is super important to people who have a language they consider to be sacred. The Quran is on a tablet sitting next to Allah in heaven. that Gabriel spoke the Quran to Muhammad in Arabic. And so there's like the language. If you look at the Kaaba, the stone in the pagan temple, there was a pagan temple in Mecca, and there's a stone in the pagan temple that they've been debating about what it is forever. And it's amazing because Muslims are iconoclasts, they're anti-icons, but yet they have to bow down 5 times a day to a black stone in Saudi Arabia. And then their goal in life is to go there and walk around the black stones. It's like, give me a break. It's like the ultimate icon veneration. And originally, on Muhammad's night journey, Muhammad got taken by, it might have been Gabriel, it might have been somebody else, got taken by an angel to Jerusalem, is what they think, in the middle of the night. And then they prayed there, and then he came back, and it was all happened at night. He was on the wings of an angel, and he flew over there. And then he met with Allah, and they had conversations, and he went up to heaven also, and then Allah told him that the Muslims have to pray 50 times a day. And they had some negotiation, and then they got to 5. We had the same thing in the Hare Krishna movement. Srila Prabhupada was meeting with his disciples in 1966 and telling them, it was interesting, he initiated people and then told them what they had to do. So Prabhupada did an initiation ceremony in 1966, initiated a bunch of people, and then afterwards posted the rules for initiation. Celibacy or monogamy, vegetarianism, sobriety, no gambling, and chanting japa every day. And they mimeographed. It was like an early copy machine thing. Mimeographs were like copy machines, but they were different. I don't know how they were different, but they were. And so I think taking a photograph of it and replicating that, it just like replicated the ink. I'm not exactly sure how they work because that just sounds like an inkjet printer. But anyway, mimeographs were early copy machines. Google it. And if you look at a mimeograph, it's kind of like a green, bluish type ink. And then he just posted one day the rules they had to follow on the wall. And people were freaked out because they had no idea what they'd signed up for by getting initiated. Now we don't do it like that anymore. Now we make you wait years and we tell you the rules on the front end. But that was how things got started. And so initially it was 64 rounds, which is about 6 hours, 7 hours of japa a day. And the devotee, I think it was Satsvarup Maharaj, was talking to Prabhupada, and he said, and then Prabhupada said, okay, 32. And then Prabhupada eventually said, okay, 16, but no less. And that was how we got to 16 rounds. It was 64 got dumbed down twice to 16. So we cry about having to chant 16 rounds, but we got off easy. The number was supposed to be 64. That's a big chunk of your day, meditating. 6 hours a day, it's like no joke. And we devotees, a lot of times, as they get older and retire and stuff like that, they start chanting 64 rounds a day. I knew a devotee who chanted 128 rounds a day for about 20 years. Local devotee, lived up in LA. The father of a friend of mine. 128 rounds a day. It's like a good 12 hours a day, at least 11, 12 hours a day of japa. For 20 years. He was a Hare Krishna for many generations back. His family was a Vaishnava family, going back many generations. Centuries. But yeah, so 50 times a day became 5 times a day. Anyway, so I got the night journey, japa. I don't know, how did I get into that? The tangent was the night journey. So I have to figure out why the night journey was. Now the night journey was for the 50 times a day. Yeah, they're iconoclasts. They have to bow down to this black rock 5 times a day. And I remember this little tangential story. It was originally 50 times a day. That's where I deviated. Thank you. But if you look at the Kaaba, that pagan temple, which was, I don't know, co-opted by Islam, stolen by Islam, repurposed, that original pagan temple now is the center of Islam, and it's got this tapestry around it with verses of the Quran written on it. They change it once a year. And you know you're dealing with a sacred language tradition when you see them writing that calligraphy. And Jews will put the Torah on their head, and they'll walk into the synagogue with the Torah carried in a silver end cusp type deals, and with silk on top of it, carried on their head with a big kirtan, and they'll go and install it. Or you pay for the Torah to be copied on leather by a scribe in a really precise way, and that those books are put into the synagogues, and they become the center of that house of worship. So you get these traditions, and they take sacred language really seriously. Ours is one of them, and so I'm familiar with the way traditions view sacred languages. And then he told me what I thought was like a kind of a child's version. This is the only way to pronounce Quranic Arabic. It's standard. The modern Arabic we have is exactly the same it was pronounced for 1,000 years at least. I hear this kind of, everybody always says this kind of stuff. And eventually it irked me or irritated me enough that I went on Wikipedia for about 90 seconds and then located what I knew was there, the Qiraat and the Tajweed, the varying schools of how to pronounce the Quran and the rules for pronunciation. And then I located that the original Quran did not have all those diacritic style marks on it, marking vowels and accent. Those were added later on. Different schools add different marks, and they all have a system of pronunciation that they follow, and there's 7 or 10 different schools, and there are different ways of pronouncing the Quran, as evidenced by even the links he sent me, what to speak of the stuff I found. And so, in the beginning, when you study something, you're just so busy trying to learn the thing you study that you anchor yourself to whatever the first thing you learn is with anchoring bias, and you end up dumbing down what ends up being a very, very large subject, and you try to make it extremely simple because your brain is too small to hold anything else. You have like an immature receptacle, and it can only hold so much knowledge. And so you learn something, and then you spend like your whole life trying to prove that what you learned is the gospel truth. And people do this. They go into a catechism, or they ask a teacher, and they say, this is what it is. Now, with Sanskrit, interestingly enough, it is what it is, because Panini, thousands of years ago, wrote down where your tongue goes in your mouth to pronounce syllables. You have your kantavya, which is your gutturals, ko, go, no. Your tongue's back in your throat. Then you have your danta, ta, da, no. You can hear it right here. Your tongue has to touch your teeth, where you get the word dental from, danta. Then you have oshya, pa, ba, ma, your labials. Try to say pa without touching your lips together. Who did it? Say pa without touching your lips together. Who did that? Was it you? What'd you say? Yeah, see? You can't. The only way to make the pa sound is to, look at it. Pa. See it? Pa. You have to do it. There's no other way to do it. And so, Panini wrote this down, and in fact, that is how modern language is taught at a serious level. They go ahead and work out exactly where your tongue goes in your mouth, whether it's aspirated or non-aspirated, and they teach you the language scientifically, so you just know where to place your tongue. Like Sanskrit has ta, and ta, two different ones. Your tongue is either touching the back of your teeth, or it's a little bit further back. You follow? So you can learn a language, and so Panini did that. And in fact, his system was picked up by modern linguists, and they use it. So it's like a little flex for Sanskrit, is that we can actually say what it sounded like thousands of years ago when Panini wrote his grammar. You get it? And we can also say that Panini's grammar has been standard for thousands of years by every Sanskritist I've ever spoken to. But there's still different chandas and meters that you can chant verses in, and there's South and North Indian ways. There's different recensions of text. And if you listen to pundits who memorize huge sections of Sanskrit text, sometimes they're working off of one manuscript versus another, and so you'll get variant readings and stuff like that. People don't like to admit that. So you always find these non-academic people trying to tell you that every version of the Bible is exactly the same. Every manuscript is exactly the same, which is ridiculous. And if you go back to Qumran and you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's all sorts of variant readings. There's all sorts of manuscripts. That's why you have to come up with what's called critical editions. Critical editions of a text are when they get all the manuscripts and they go and they compare them, and then the super variant readings they get rid of. Of course, one of those random manuscripts that's different than all the others could have been the original. But it deviated so much from the norm that they got rid of it, and they stick with the core. It doesn't mean they got it right, but it's just the best they can do to approximating things. You're good, don't worry about it. And so I'm far enough in my groove where I'm good. So this stuff is vexing for newbies. It freaks them out. Variant readings and different manuscript evidence and different rules for pronunciation or different legitimate pronunciations. They can't wrap their head around it because they anchor themselves to the first thing they heard, and their cup is small, so they can only hold so much information before their brain starts to freeze up. And so they just end up with a very simplistic version of things that they're dogmatically attached to because it's been proven anchor bias is a real thing. The first thing you hear, you'll then accept more easily, and then anything which contradicts it, you will subject to very, very high standards of evidence. So anyway, as I was bringing Ishwar back to earth by pointing out the variant readings that are accepted, in fact, and I knew I would find it. I wrote schools of pronunciation for the Quran, and the world opened up to me because, of course, they have all these different schools and guides for pronunciation, largely based on geographical areas. You follow? And what's kind of what this, and then you got the Saudis, so they're going to be Wahhabis, which is a 17th century, I believe 17th century. I'm almost certain. Radical Muslim reformer who thought that things were getting really materialistic in the 1600s in Saudi Arabia. So there was a Muslim cleric who got upset that Islam was being modernized and it wasn't being followed properly in the 1600s in Saudi Arabia and wanted to reform things back to the way they were done in the 7th century. You understand what I'm saying? It's like, and he was trying to get them to go back, and that's the guys who were in charge of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi royal family, which was just the Bedouin family that happened to win when they modernized and formed a proper government. Then they're followers of this person. And so they've got their pronunciation and their thing, and they do it, and it's Makkah. And, even he's like, yeah, some people say that, but it's not correct. It's like, It's a Saudi dialect. Of course, the city's literally located in Saudi Arabia. So a Saudi dialect could make an argument that they're the most legitimate, which I couldn't care less about. It's not bugging me at all. And I've said Makkah to like literally thousands of Muslims, and no one's called me out on that. But my white buddy is like all up in arms about it. Because that's what happens, you know, you got to convert and go big. And then, anyway, so that was a conversation I had on my way up. You know, 20 minutes of my life I'll never get back. But it did make me think of something, which is that if you can allow yourself to just not try to master a tradition in one day, and allow yourself to just hear and learn and question and have doubts and be new and not have it all figured out. And just, your cup's small, but just let your cup overflow. And be aware that your cup's overflowing and you're not going to hold on to all of it. And don't try to have a black belt overnight. And just take the time to learn the tradition. If you can do that, you'll avoid some of that anchor bias. You'll avoid dumbing down the tradition. And in the long run, you'll become masterful quicker. We want to lock stuff down. We're all like women in our late 30s. I'm going to lock that guy down and get pregnant and have a kid. I realize that is edgy. I realize that statement was edgy. I'm aware. I'm having fun. Just roll with me. And so, we want to lock stuff down. It's natural. But you can't. If your cup is too small, you can't. You can't hold the tradition. It's too much. And I told Ish, I'm like, look, your Egyptian friend, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's an Arabic teacher. Arabic is the lingua franca of Egypt. He grew up speaking Arabic. But that's different than being a Quranic scholar of Arabic. You get a Quranic scholar of Arabic, he's like, well, you've got the Qiraat, here are all the schools of Qiraat, here's where they're located, here's when they came about. And you got the Tajweed, those are the rules that exist within each school to tell you how to pronounce the Quran. Here are the variant readings that, here's where they agree, here's where they disagree. Right? And then here's all the other things that are attached to that. And here's where you can find these things in the Quran and the later Hadith, because all this stuff's coming from the later tradition. And he'll actually walk you through it, and your mind will just explode because you're talking to a group of people who've spent well over 1,000 years codifying this stuff because they take it really seriously. And then after you go through that, you can start to understand what the main interpretation is, what's standard, what variants are accepted as standard, what's really on the edge. But if you want to get into it, it's a subject, because for a pretty large group of people at this point, 1.5 to 2 billion people at this point, this stuff was important, and they've spent the last almost 1,500 years working through it, codifying it, memorizing, making rules, debating back and forth. Does that make sense? So you're approaching something that's big. You know, they say Aristotle was the last person to know everything about everything. because in many ways he was the father of physics and so many other subjects for the Western world anyway. And he wrote on just so many different topics authoritatively, and his book kind of became the start of that discipline for the last couple thousand years. But now there's so much information in all these different fields that you can't even become a master of medicine. You become a master of, you can't even become a master of surgery. You become a master of like foot surgery and like particular operations on the feet. But you can't even do it all. It's not that you're a master heart surgeon for all things heart surgery. You'll be a master of particular things that are done with heart surgery. Because there's just so much information out there. And so we should approach a tradition, a new subject, with a certain veneration and an awareness that we can't learn it in a weekend. You know, yoga teacher training is kind of like in that way. I don't know what the word is. A gimmick? It's not. I mean, I'm not trying to like denigrate you guys. But you tell somebody yoga teacher training, it's not like, I mean, you do a 300 hour, a 500 hour. I mean, that's not enough to have learned the subject. I mean, an average person works 2,000 hours a year. So a 500 hour, a big one, a 500, right? That's equivalent to 3 months of your average schmo's Monday to Friday gig. You think working construction for 3 months, you're going to become a master carpenter, a master framer, a master anything? You become a master pouring concrete in 3 months? Forget construction. Yoga's like construction. Let's just take something real simple, like pouring foundations of concrete. Like something really, what seems to be really simple. Right? You build the form, you put down some rebar, you mix up some crete, you pour it down. What's the big deal, right? And then you float it. Seems really simple, right? You ever watch guys float concrete? It's insane. They're like ballet dancers. The way they smooth it out and make it all nice, it's just unbelievable. It's an art form. You're not even learning how to float concrete in 3 hours. Let's speak of like how long concrete goes off, how not to waste a truck of concrete, all that stuff. You're not even learning how to float. What gauge rebar, all sorts of different stuff like that, how many inches thick. Forget all how to build nice forms. Forget all that stuff. You're not even going to learn just how to float in 3 months. So really what happens when you do a yoga teacher training is the goal is for you to learn enough that you can teach a class and not ridiculously embarrass yourself or injure somebody. Right? And then you spend years. And I mean, think about it. Let's just take Leela. How long have you been teaching yoga?
10 years.
10 years. Or Kumi. How long have you been teaching yoga?
22.
We'll go with Kumi. Do you ever look back at the way you taught 5 years ago and just think, oh my God, like those poor people?
5 months ago.
Right? And so, you know, I mean, 22 years teaching yoga, she's a master. 22 years, you're a master. But that's 22 years. You might do a 322 days. Crash course, you can do that thing in 22 days. You just can't, it's just not possible. So what do? You learn some of the basics, a little bit of a skeleton, and if you approach it right, even in those 22 days or 22 hours, but you gotta accept the most I can do is sort of orient myself towards the process. and learn the skeleton. You're good. And learn the skeleton. And get a couple of little, like maybe doohickeys, a couple little cool things. A couple little somethings. But you can't master the topic. You can't speak authoritatively on the topic. You're still a newbie. And if you get a really good teacher who structures it right, hopefully at the end of a teacher training, you will be able to teach a class without injuring anybody or embarrassing yourself. But a year later, you will look back on that first class you taught and be so embarrassed. And then a year after that, it'll be the same thing over. If you're not, like Covey wrestles. He's #1 ranked wrestler in the state of California. My son Covey. Covey today kills Covey 3 months ago. You follow? Kills him. Mops the floor with him. My son, 3 months ago, won the #1 slot. Best wrestler in the state of California in his age bracket, in his weight class. #1. Like there's a big podium. We had to drive up to Fresno. Big competition. The one. The big one for the year. And Covey's on top of the podium, and he's the top guy. Big trophy. I hate those big trophies. They're just like, give him like a Leatherman jacket or something like that, monster trophy. Covey today destroys Covey from 3 months ago. Because his education's continuing. Not like he beats himself 3 years ago. Like he pins himself. You follow? It's not even competitive. Because he's learning. It's good. But then what it means is if you want to be honest, you got to be like, hey, I don't know everything. I'm not sure. I'm just exploring this myself. And if you have that kind of an attitude, your learning curve will be much better because you won't be wasting a bunch of energy with anchoring bias and defending super amateurish thoughts and trying to dumb the tradition down to fit into your little brain. You'll be able to approach greatness and your brain will morph and broaden to accommodate the tradition instead of accommodating tradition to match up with your brain size. Did you guys follow this? All that said, I thought we could look at a verse. I think the verse is powerful. I think the verse is powerful, independent of fidelity to our tradition. I think the verse is pregnant, it's full of meaning, it has great value, and it's one of these verses where if you approach it with the right attitude, it's illuminating. You're not going to own it in a day or in the time we have to talk about it. But it is a powerful voice speaking a powerful truth a long time ago that's just as relevant today as it was when it was spoken. And independent of whether this is the proper reading or if there's another manuscript elsewhere with a variant reading that might be older, and how the commentators sometimes will change one word, indicating they were reading different manuscripts. And, independent of looking of trying to own the verse and lock it down and say it's pronounced exactly this way or this is exactly its meaning, independent of that, without needing to do that, there's some real truth in here. It requires a certain amount of learning to be able to understand what the verse says. But just because you learn enough to understand what the verse says, you don't own it. It's kind of like it owns you, ideally, because you're touching something bigger than yourself. And so what you really want to do is have a reverent attitude so that that ocean of wisdom, potentially, if you find the right tradition, you're able to accommodate it. And you grow by interacting with it, instead of you adulterate it and limit it and try to own it and then weaponize it and use it against other people. You follow? All right. So the verse is Manusyanam. Manusya means men. Actually, Manusya is cognate to the English word man. Manusyanam sahasreshu, of thousands of men. In thousands of men. Sahasreshu means in thousands, manusyanam of men. I don't want to get too into it, but like manusyanam is the genitive. It means of men. Sahasreshu is the locative. It means in thousands of men. Now, in thousands of men does not mean in thousands of males. Just like mankind indicates both men and women. Just like the struggle of man refers to both the struggle of men and women. Just like the plight of man means the plight of mankind and includes both men and women. Similarly, manusyanam is also generic in that sense, although in the masculine. Do you guys follow that? In thousands of people. But if you say people, which is a better translation in English, you miss that man is cognate to manusya. So there's something nice about saying in thousands of men, because you see the relationship between Sanskrit and English. But in thousands of people is actually better. You follow? Now, in thousands doesn't literally mean in thousands. It means in a very, very large number. It could also mean in millions or billions or trillions. It means a really large number. You follow? It's not like somebody said out of 1,731 people. Not like that. Manusyanam sahasreshu kaschit yatati siddhaye. Someone strives for perfection. Siddha, siddhaye, for perfection. Someone strives for perfection. Kaschit, someone strives for perfection. What that means, kaschit, someone, is used to indicate one person might. In thousands, out of many, many people, one person may strive for perfection. Yatanam api siddhanam kaschin me veti tatvataha. Of those who strive, yatanam is now the genitive, of the strivers, siddhanam, of the perfected ones. So now you get three levels. Of thousands of people, one person strives for perfection. But then of those strivers, and even of those few people who have achieved perfection, yatanam api siddhanam, of the strivers, even of the perfected ones, kaschin, someone, me veti tatvataha, someone truly knows me. One person might truly know me. 1,000 times 1,000 times 1,000 is a billion. So I mean like 7 people on the planet might know Krishna. We got a verse. And the verse has Sanskrit words. The words all have significance. They follow the rules of grammar. You want to approach our text, you kind of have to do this. Otherwise, you can trust a translator. But it's like no joke. You want to start to deal with people who have a sacred language, a language they feel is sacred, books they feel are sacred. This is what we do. We memorize verses, and we know what they mean. We learn the language, so we know what they mean. And we're just doing like a low-level, elementary-level grammar. Then, we can do like a concordance where you start to look at all the other places in the Gita or in the Vedic literatures where these same words are used in different contexts. So we can understand contextually how these words are used or what they mainly indicate. Like a very fancy index, which computers have made really easy to do, but it used to be people would spend decades making, let's say, biblical concordances. Decades. Groups of people would spend decades making biblical concordances so you could easily look up a word and see every place in the Bible where it occurred in context, so you get an understanding of how that word is used in this language in the sacred literature. Like, what does siddha mean? Siddha means success. Siddhya, siddhyo, samobudva. In success or failure, be the same. Krishna says in the Gita. That doesn't mean power. That means success. The word siddha means success. Can also mean perfection, but there's perfection with a lowercase p and perfection with an uppercase p. If Krishna says, of those who are perfect, maybe one of them knows me in truth, that indicates that the perfect here is a lower level of perfect, and there's a higher level of perfect that is knowing Krishna in truth, which dwarfs the lower level of perfection that it's being contrasted to. You following this? We can start to get into it, right? So we can go through the grammar of the verse, but then we can start to go into what the words mean, how they're used in context. Are you guys following this? It's no joke. It's no joke. We're not playing. We've got a sacred language that's been sacred to billions of people for thousands of years. We've got texts which are sacred to us. Really sacred. Like die over them sacred. And they've been studied religiously by people who morph their lives to help them deeply understand the subject matter. By performing austerities. By becoming a better version of yourself, such that the magic of the text will unfold and reveal itself to you. It's revealed. It's revelation. It's an interaction of spirit and matter. For people who hold a text sacred, spirit reached down into matter and gave this as a bridge to cross back over, as a symbol, as an instance of like magic, as an instance of a miracle. And that doesn't mean you go light on scholarship. It means you go big on scholarship. Because you care about it enough that you take the time to study it, learn it, memorize it, understand what it's saying. You follow? You guys aren't going to learn this in the class. A, you're not going to memorize the verse. If you don't already know it. Manusyanam sahasrashu kaschid yatati siddhaye yatanam api siddhanam kaschid me veti tatata. If you know the verse already, you know it. Who knows the verse? That's how important the verse is. Like, several people in the room know it by heart. If you don't know by heart, you're not going to memorize it. We could make a class just about memorizing the verse, but then you'd be like a Jewish person who memorized the verse and doesn't know what it means. You follow? We go that route. You get it? We go that route. And then the hope is you'll develop a love for Hebrew language and you'll eventually learn it. But you're 33 years old. You learn Hebrew? No. You did not. Like every other bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah person I know. You didn't learn it. So, you go that route. Then you can go the grammatical route, trying to, learn how to memorize a verse or memorize the meanings of each word. It's another layer. More difficult to do. Not going to do that in a class, for sure. Then there's a concordance route where you memorize the meaning of the words in the context of our sacred tradition. That you're not going to do in a month. You follow? Then there's pronunciation. That's a whole other one. You take some time on that. But I think what we can do in 10 minutes, I was thinking about this verse, and here's why I chose it. I also lectured on it yesterday in a group of 7 verses, and said I like the verse. It's interesting, but there's a whole philosophy this verse is built around. Number one is that God exists. That's an unstated premise of the verse. A second unstated premise of the verse is, and that's, it's not that that's not taught in the Gita, but this verse assumes that. If you divorce it from its context, that's a working assumption, a big, major, unstated assumption of the verse, that Krishna actually exists. And also Krishna's God, because the goal of life is to know him. So not only, it's another premise, right? There's several premises. Number one is that God exists. Number two is that you can know God. Number three is that you should want to know God as the purpose of your life. Those are 3 unstated premises that strike me right off the bat. This is now starting to put the verse within the context of our philosophy, our theology. You guys following this? Also, Krishna speaks of himself in the first person, singular. You can know me. You got a person talking to you. They're a person. They're a being. Which makes sense because you're a being, and how could your source not also be a being? Spend the next year thinking about that one. It's not only does God exist, but God is a being. And you can know God. Now, normally when you know things, you know them by controlling them, studying them, looking at it under a microscope, but sometimes measuring it. But then the thing you want to study or understand is immeasurable and fundamentally greater than you. Then that normal empiric methodology of controlling and studying something would no longer work, because the thing that you're studying is, by definition, beyond your ability to comprehend. Of course, if that being was omnipotent and omnibenevolent, all good and all powerful, then that being could give you knowledge of themselves, and it might even want to. And so a verse like this actually opens the door for bhakti. That the way you can truly know Krishna. In fact, Krishna says it, Bhaktya mama bijanati yavanyaschasmi tatvataha. You can only know me in truth, bhaktya, by bhakti. That statement's also made. And so within a simple verse like this, a single verse, you find there's a sacred language you have to learn, there's an intonation, there's a pronunciation, there's a philosophy, there's grammar. It's all there. Unstated premises, stated points, it's all there. And it's a far out idea that the goal, that God exists, that the goal of life is to know God, that through grace you can know divinity, that represents the highest perfection. I mean, you can also think about it logically. Let's say, for example, just hypothetically, that God did exist. And let's say hypothetically that deity was all good and all powerful, and therefore wanted you to know him and could help you know him. If that was the case, what would be more important than that in life? Non-rhetorical question. We're wrapping things up now. Non-rhetorical question. If hypothetically God existed, we're not going to deal with whether or not God exists today because I got 5 minutes left. And you can't always be starting from, I can't always reinvent the wheel. Sometimes you speak in English, you don't bother then teaching people English in order to speak in English, because otherwise you'd just be giving an ABC class for the rest of your life and you never get beyond it. So assuming that, for the purpose of this discussion alone, that God exists, that God is a person, all good, all powerful, wants you to know him, can help you know him, that such a thing is possible, such a miraculous thing of knowing the source of all creation is possible. What would be more important than that?
Nothing.
We got nothing. Yes?
To do your best to kind of alleviate suffering within the world. Do your best to be a good person in this world. I know the perspective of good is alleviating suffering by bringing healing to this world.
That's a nice answer. Thank you for sharing that. You came late to class, which is cool, and you obviously feel passionately about what you're speaking about, which I also appreciate very much. And it seems like you're putting your shoes on your way out the door, so I don't want to keep you too long. But I am going to respond to what you said, because I think what you said is really good and it deserves a response. I think what you missed is that the highest good would be done to the world by you knowing divinity. And that any good you tried to do without knowing divinity would then be faulty and fundamentally flawed. It would be like saying, if everyone had cancer, instead of finding the cure for cancer, you would just help people and do your best without realizing that the way to obviously do that, because you know what everybody's suffering from, would be to then find a cure for cancer. And so it's a generic statement, do your best, do good, in the context of that God exists and you can know God. If you can know God, then you've solved the Rubik's Cube of this world. And you could then give that knowledge to others and do the greatest good for them. And any subservient good you did for them would be paltry in comparison. Maybe you give them some clothes, but then those clothes wear out. Maybe you give them some medication, but then eventually they get sick again. What we're talking about here with the idea of spirituality, and specifically with the idea of theism, is you're talking about the biggest idea which has ever existed. Period. That there is a source of all reality. That you're connected to that source. That you can know that source. That you can help others by extension to know that source. That you can find the deepest fulfillment in that. And that can then guide all of your subsequent moves and takes all those zeros and puts a 1 in front of it. You can water a tree and then all the leaves flourish. And there becomes this artificial deification in our small minds. I'll just do my best to do my duty for God and my country and help others to the best of my ability. But anybody could just then do anything. And what we're talking about now is looking at the structure of reality and understanding there's a cynosure or a center point or a root of all existence. And then naturally, it's almost like the physics of reality, that by connecting with that source, you then become connected to everything. You can then know how to best help people. And so it becomes everything you said and so much you didn't would be accomplished by knowing divinity. These are big ideas. And they're as big today as when they were spoken. They're powerful, transformative. The idea itself is like gorgeous, beautiful, intriguing, mesmerizing, almost miraculous in itself. And independent of the Sanskrit language or fidelity to our tradition or memorization or proper pronunciation or learning a grammar or learning a concordance, the idea itself is amazing. And so in some ways what you want to do is you want to find great ideas. You don't own them. They're too big. The ramifications of them are too big. If you try to own them, you end up with a partial understanding of things. You end up dumbing them down to fit in your small receptacle. But the idea is huge. Massive. And so what we can do is we can take a reverent attitude towards looking at wisdom literature and sacred traditions. Not that we turn off our critical thinking skills. Those can be on, 100%. Plenty of room for doubt, dialogue, back and forth, challenging conversations. Plenty of room for all that. But we can approach it with this mindset of I may not be able to master this. I may not be able to own this. This might be way bigger than me. Let me just try to catch the essence of what's being said. Let me try to appreciate the essential point that's being said. And then see how that affects my life. I think that's kind of the best you can do. And too much time, it becomes punctilious. Too much time spent on memorization and pronunciation and grammar. Stuff I've spent my life doing. Because I'm a priest and it's part of my training. But too much time on that and you lose the essence. You want to become Saragrahi, someone who catches the essence of things, instead of Bharavahi, someone who carries a heavy load unnecessarily. And this ability to catch the essence, to cut through, to look at what's fundamentally being said, it speeds up the learning process. It makes your receptacle bigger, and the wisdom in the tradition will unfold itself to you and become accessible to you in a way that it wouldn't. And normally what you have to do is go through this, like shrinking the tradition down for years and years and trying to own it before you eventually have some sort of cathartic event and realize you can't do that, and then you open up and you start to grow in relationship to the tradition. You can actually circumvent that process and hack it and have the right attitude from the beginning. And I tried my best to do that with a single verse and with the example of the pronunciation of Makat al-Mukarrama and looking at things that are there in traditions that people take seriously, and to create a little hierarchy of where we should cut in. What's the essence? What's being communicated? How powerful is this idea? How transformative is this idea? And we're done. Let's do a little kirtan. Thank you.